India-European relations and for the contribution that they jointly can make to an international governance that is rules-based, based on a common sense of international decency and predictability in our behavior towards each other.
Raisina, would you like to jump in on this?
I would actually agree with the view shared by the Minister, and of course I would like to stress that probably it's not really common knowledge how much was achieved in the last 2 years. The very fact that the European Union, which is now also striving for becoming a geopolitical actor, the European Union as a collective actor is in fact not a geopolitical actor yet. This is something that we have to also state very openly, but it wants to learn the language of power, and if it wants to learn the language of power, it needs to also deal with the major great powers, and in this sense, of course, it has a significant geoeconomic clout that it can use. So this is something that can be helpful to India. However, we also have to understand that, and we have to accept that India has its own geopolitical interests, its own geoeconomic interests, and it has, of course, much broader agenda of alliances and partnerships. And here, for instance, there is this misunderstanding in Europe when it comes to the approach to Russia. Now, in our case, in the European case, we also have a different approach to China. That would mean one that is not being shared by India. The very fact that we have deepened relations with China significantly in the geoeconomic domain and have helped China become this significant second system pole, this is something that India certainly does not share. So in a sense, we have to also develop an understanding while deepening the relationship, the institutional one. And here I argue that we really need FTA, free trade agreement, that needs to be signed as quickly as possible, adopted as quickly as possible. We cannot lose another 10 years in negotiations. This is something that both will benefit from, but at the very same time we also have to develop an understanding for each other's different geopolitical interests.
Thank you. Let me, before I turn to the External Affairs Minister, Jeff, very quickly, how are the two countries looking at the future? Where are the points of disagreement and friction? And your assessment of the opportunities over the next few years, and then I'll turn to the External Affairs Minister. Jeff?
First of all, I think we've done a much better job in recent years navigating differences. And I think the Ukraine issue has been a prominent example of that, something that in the past may have caused legitimate discord in the relationship, is an issue that we've managed our differences quite well, as evidenced by the 2+2 dialogue just a few weeks ago. Minister Jaishankar was in Washington. I think we handled those differences with maturity, and I think the U.S. understands India's perspective better than it used to, and it understands that, as Minister Jaishankar said years ago, sometimes India doesn't take sides, it takes its own side. And that's okay. That's what the Indian government that's what the Indian people elected the government to do, is to take India's side. But the beauty of it is that our interests are often in alignment. And so India's side often is the same as the US and Europe on these issues. But it's incumbent on us to demonstrate why it's in India's interests to cooperate on issues, not tell them and lecture them why it's in their interest, but demonstrate why we have common interests and pursue ways to operationalize those interests. I think we've come a long way in that regard.
Mr. Minister, let me turn to you. So I thought maybe we could use this opportunity for you to disclose some of your private meetings with the leaders you meet during your visit. You don't have to name them. You can just give us some anecdotes. I mean, and let me kind of frame it. Maybe you can tell us, as you travel through the various countries that you visit, what is the most often heard criticism or complaint or maybe a curious question that you hear that befuddles them in terms of our actions, and also perhaps a flavor of what they want from you. What is their expectation from you? So I think a mix of both, that what befuddles them and what excites them about your visit, when you go and visit them or when a prime minister visits them. If you disclose names, it will be good, but also without names will be fine.
Thank you. I would give you a more analytical and probably more detached answer than you are expecting. So look, when we are looking at India at 75, it's not just India at 75, we're also looking at another 25 years ahead. You know, what have we done? Where have we fallen short? What do we want to do? Because those are often the conversations we have when we go out. If I were to pick a single thing we've done, a difference we've made to the world in the last 75 years, it is the fact that we are a democracy. If today there's a sense in the world that, you know, for all the ups and downs of history, what's happening in different geographies, but somehow in all of us there is that gut sense that democracy is in some form the future. A large part of it is due to the choices that India made and choices that India stuck with in very difficult situations. And there was a time when in this part of the world we were pretty much the only democracy. So if democracy is global today, or we see it as global today, I think in some measure that credit is due to India. Now, it's also fair when we look back at 75 years, we should reflect on where we have come up short. And I would say the 2-3 areas which are quite obvious. One, clearly we didn't pay the kind of attention to our social indicators, our human resources, as we should have. 2, we didn't concentrate as much on manufacturing and technology strengths as we should have. And 3, in terms of foreign policy, probably in the mix of various elements, we didn't give as much importance, as much weight to hard security as we should have. And I say this because, this is not a polemical criticism of the past. Other countries who were in similar situations did exactly this, and which is one of the reasons why some of them are today ahead. It is something we are trying to do now. I mean, these are exactly the areas we are trying to correct at this point of time. So it's not that it can't be done. It is being done even as we speak. So what is it I think we should be doing in the future? One, I would say most of all to me, the next 25 years is about capability, capability, and capability in every possible domain, in every possible way. We should be completely fixated on outcomes. We should be utterly practical about how we leverage the international environment. So a lot of the conversations which we have when we go abroad is about capability building. The second is, and that goes back to some remarks you made about how we are perceived. Look, we have to be confident about who we are. I think it's better to engage the world on the basis of who we are rather than try and please the world as a pale imitation of what they are. This idea that others define us, that somewhere there we need to get approval of other quarters, I think that's an era we need to put behind us. And definitely I would hope in the next 25 years we will be even more deeply international in terms of our commitments, in terms of our responsibilities, in terms of our role than we are. And since you're asking me, so all these conversations, say something which is of interest. I must say my morning was made today by meeting a fellow foreign minister who told me that Gujarat is ahead of globalization. Actually he said Gujarat doesn't need globalization, they're already out there. I think in a way I would hope in the next 25 years India too is actually at the forefront of a kind of a right kind of globalization, more decentralized, more fair, one which works for everybody, and one which is not leveraged, which is not weaponized.
Let me ask you, let's flip this question. What do we expect from the world? We have some key partners, we are diving into certain key relationships, whether it's the EU, whether it's the US, whether it's our big investments into political and economic investments into Africa. What are we seeking from the world as we move to the capacity stage of our next 25 years?
Well, I think I would look at it, I think I'll tell you what we should not be doing. We shouldn't be looking at the world with a sense of entitlement. You know, we need to earn our place in the world, and which to a certain extent would therefore come to the issue of how does the world benefit by the growth of India. We need to demonstrate that. I think today, when there's a lot of talk about reliable, resilient supply chains, when people speak about transparency and trusted technologies, if India could do more and show the rest of the world that the world benefits by India being bigger, so we need to develop stakes in our future where the rest of the world is concerned. I think some of that is happening. Some of that is happening for strategic reasons, obviously, but we need to make more of it happen, especially for economic reasons.
Prime Minister Harper, would you like to come in on something that the Minister said? Would you have a comment?
There's one comment I think really needs to be made, and that is to reflect, because the Minister rightly reflected on some things India can do better in the future. But I think we should take a moment at 75 to reflect on what a relative success India actually is. Now, if you look at all of the countries that emerged from colonialism in the post-war period, and you focused on their various vulnerabilities, strengths and weaknesses, you would look at India and you would say, look at this country of just enormous cleavages, regional, religious, linguistic, social, cultural, and with enormous social and economic challenges. And here we are 75 years later, and of all the countries that have emerged from that past, there are very few that have demonstrated the unity, the high levels of governance, the advancement of human rights and democracy, the economic advancement, the eradication of hunger. So look, I think that we obviously need to reflect on what India can do better or different, but it is a remarkable success story. And compared to other countries that objectively should have been way ahead of India, India is ahead of just about all of them.
So we are going to open it up to all of you. I would request you to walk to the mic and pose your question. My young fellows, especially the Raisina young fellows, the officer trainees. I would want to see some young voices come into this conversation as well. But till they come to the mic, why don't you go ahead? We'll take a bunch of questions. Okay, do introduce yourself and short questions, no commentaries.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Hai Quen from Tel Aviv University, Israel. My question is to Minister of Foreign Affairs of India. You spoke about self-confidence. We really appreciate, we really are aware of the fact that India is is the largest democracy in the world, and it is a rising power. So my question is to you is regarding what are your plans for turning India into a permanent member into a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Thank you.
There are two questions on that end. Please go ahead, the young fellows.
Thanks, Amir. My question is also to...
What's your name? Introduce yourself.
My name is Mohammed. I am from Egypt, and I am with the Raisina Young Fellows. So my question is to His Excellency, the Minister of India, Mr. Jai Shankar. You mentioned yesterday the efforts of India to increase food supply and increase the production of wheat. So could you please elaborate on that?
And the next question, please. Yeah, just come.
You're going to get
go ahead. Yeah, but please go ahead. Please. Okay. Esther.
Thank you, Samir. My name is Esther. I'm from Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. My question is to Your Excellency Minister Jaishankar. Earlier, you said that in the future, India should be confident and then it should define itself based on what it thinks of itself, not what the world think of itself. Just today, there's an article released in Foreign Affairs by Dr. Shashi Tharoor saying that India should be clear on its stance on Ukraine, and I quote, "An India that equivocated on Ukraine cannot blame others for responding with the same indifference if China decided to teach it a lesson and we do the
Shashi is sitting right here.
Yes. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts about this? Because Indonesia is in a way in the same stance in India. We don't want to choose sides, but at the same time, we have this big question of neutrality and many others. Thank you so much.
And final question here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Vijayakant.
The one in front, sir, please.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is Ali Miftahi.
I'll come to you. Let's take the...
Ali Miftahi, Deputy Chief of Mission Embassy of Tunisia. My question is to Dr. Jaishankar. It's quite simple. You are saying that 75 years of independence of India is about what have been achieved so far. My question is, and what you are looking to do for the next 25 years. How do you see the Indo-Pacific region and the world for the next 25 years? This is for Dr. Jaishankar and for all the panelists. Thank you very much.
I'm going to convert the question for all of them because it's only...
Yes.
Wait. The gentleman there and no more questions. Last question there. We are running out of... Yeah, please go
This is Vijayakant from Kathmandu. I have a question to External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar. When India was independent, it has created a democratic movement in all other Southeastern countries. What you were looking for during the more 25 years as democratic institutions, and what India has looking to bilateral relations and multilateral relations with other Southeastern countries. Thank you.
Okay, I'll take you. Go ahead. Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Patrick Kugiel, I'm from the Polish Institute of International Affairs in Warsaw, Poland. I have a question to His Excellency Minister Jaishankar. In your book, The India Way, you wrote that India must be more ready and willing to take a risk in international affairs, and that India will be more decider, shaper, rather than abstainer. But yet, for the last 2 months, India abstained at least 11 times at the different forums at the UN on different resolutions concerning Russian aggression against Ukraine. So my question is, wasn't that a good moment actually to take a risk and to have a more principled position, not to abstain, but to
question say... is, what is the question?
I got the question.
You got the question. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So risk taking and the abstention. I think that's the question. And your book, by the way, is featured in most of the questions. The India Way. So I'll start with you, and then I'll go down.
Yeah, yes, I think people shouldn't just pick on me. Let's sort of broaden it out. But look, let me give very quick replies because I know the clock is ticking. It's, on the Security Council, we have our plan. The problem is we need to have other people to have a plan which is similar to our plan.
Correct.
On the wheat, I answered it yesterday, which was, we have a significant wheat production. We would obviously like to go into the global markets and try to compensate for the shortfalls as much as we can. In fact, in respect of Egypt, because that's where the question came from, it's one of the countries with whom we are talking. There were two Ukraine issues, one relating to Shashi's article, and in fairness, I haven't read it, but she was going through it at a high speed, which was too fast for me.
But Shashi also wrote it at high speed.
Yes, I know. I'm not sure I would understand it very much better after reading it either. Here's the point, and it goes to the last question. We spent a lot of time yesterday on Ukraine, and I've tried to explain what our views are, but also explain that in our minds, the best way forward is to focus on stopping the fighting, getting the talking, and finding ways of moving forward. And we think our choices, our positions are best placed to advance that. The question which I had about, where are you going to go 25 years from now? I think more or less I answered that, we think more international, we think stronger capability, we think more relevance to the world, and obviously to the Indo-Pacific as well. And the question which the person from Nepal asked on South Asia, that in a sense, 75 years, there's more democracy in South Asia than there was 75 years ago. Where will we be 25 years from now? I would say probably the shortest, most truthful answer to that would be we would like to see more prosperity in South Asia. That if India has been, in a sense, an example of democracy or a promoter of democracy in South Asia, we would now like to be part of a larger lifting tide so that, the rest of South Asia grows along with us.
Final words from the rest of the panelists. If you want to come in on anything that you heard, you have some thoughts on his responses or what you heard as questions. Jeff, would you like to come in? Short answers.
I don't think I understood a single question that was asked from the audience. Okay. It was very garbled. But no, this has been a great opportunity to reflect back on India at 75. Samir, I want to give you and the ORF team credit for putting together another fantastic international conference in a challenging environment, frankly. It's been a great honor to share the panel with these esteemed guests. I've learned a great deal, and I look forward to returning again.
Minister Cravino?
Well, I think that one of the things that is comforting from a European perspective is that to hear here in India that the next few decades are not necessarily reduced to a story of bipolarity between the US and China. There's a lot more happening out there, and India has a very major role to play, which we welcome. We welcome greatly, and we believe that linkages between Europe and India can be a strong part of that. So I'm very pleased coming back to Delhi.
Samir, you diplomatically pointed out earlier that we in the West have a tendency to tell other people what they should do. I think in this case, I'll say that the Indian foreign minister's answers are probably the best answers on Indian foreign policy. So I'll let them stand.
Yeah. And Velina, final words to you.
Both Europe and India do not want to see an emergence of a second Cold War. They do not want to see a bifurcation of the global system. And we have a story to tell together. And that means, of course, a story that is different, that does not necessarily means alliances in this Cold War understanding, which is why if there is one development, geopolitical development that I'm really optimistic about, it is the relationship between Europe and India. Capabilities. We can deliver on that as well. So there is definitely a shared interest. And I also want to say once again, because I think that there is a lack of understanding about the great potential of India in the West, not only in Europe, but also to some extent in the United States. I think that, and I will say something very provoking at the end, the West, in fact, needs India more when facing the rise of China and the imperiled global order, how to repair this imperiled order, then India needs, in fact, the West when facing China in South Asia. So in fact, in this particular case, we have to also develop an understanding for national interests, for geopolitical choices, and we have to find these avenues for cooperation instead of actually aggravating each other because of some other choices that we do not share.
Mr. Minister, final words.
I mostly agree with what everybody said, and not out of courtesy, but really out of a genuine belief. I think India, EU, I mean, no disrespect to anybody else, including Canada, but I really think India, EU, because this has been very much a session with EU at the focus, beginning with the keynote. The India-EU partnership needs more attention, needs more work, needs more commitment, and needs to get a higher profile.
Great. So please join me in applauding this wonderful discussion and the wonderful panelists. And remain seated. We will have India's Environment Minister joining us to speak about India's green transitions. And again, thank you very much, sirs, for coming to Delhi and for joining us at the Raisina Dialogue. Thank you.